Welcome students to Chapter 8, which is going to focus on the cellular basis of reproduction and inheritance. And so we're going to talk about things like fission and mitosis and meiosis and chromosomes. Those may be terms that you've heard before. The way this chapter is sort of set up is there's a section on just sort of cell division and reproduction. It's kind of some generic information about asexual reproduction versus sexual reproduction. And then there's a section on mitosis, and then there's a section on meiosis, which is sort of the production of our sex cells. And then there's a little bit at the end about how chromosomes can sort of get changed or altered during the course of the life cycle of a cell. So we're going to start really with just some kind of basic cell division and reproduction information. When we're talking about cell division, what we are talking about is splitting the cells. So this is required not only for reproduction in terms of making new copies of an organism and procreating and continuing species, but it's also required for kind of growth and healing and development. Anytime we need to make a new cell, it has to come from a pre-existing cell. That's part of the kind of theory of cells. They don't just kind of spontaneously arise. They have to come from some pre-existing cells. And so we do that through cell division. And there's really kind of two ways that reproduction takes place. There's asexual reproduction, where the offspring are essentially genetic copies of not only the parent but each other, so they're sort of just clones. This is what goes on when we make new skin cells, or when we regenerate neurons after you've had surgery, for instance. And whereas sexual reproduction is resulting in offspring that are not genetically identical to the parent or to each other. There's a great variety in terms of what the offspring of sexual reproduction look like. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. So here you can see a protist essentially just doing some binary fission, splitting. So these are all forms of asexual reproduction. Here it is in a very simple prokaryotic cell, but even in eukaryotic cells, sea stars, for example, if they lose a limb, they have the ability to grow an organism through asexual reproduction. Or if you've ever taken a small cutting of a plant and stuck it in some root starter and grown a new plant that way, those are all forms of asexual reproduction, where the offspring are sort of genetically identical to the parent. Conversely, sexual reproduction, which is of course what humans do, results in a huge variety of organisms, and there's a ton of genetic variation. So these are all part of the same family, but you can see they have they have different looks, different skin tones, different eye color, different heights, right? There's all that variety. Now within organisms that reproduce sexually, there is a little bit of what we call growth and development that takes place. So here on the left, you can see this is a very early embryo. This is at a pretty high magnification. Very, very early stages as we're sort of making new cells. And then here we have I think it's a kidney cell that is also going through mitosis and making new copies of itself. And so whilst human beings and all the animals actually use sexual reproduction to produce offspring, our cells do a little bit of mitosis, which results in genetically identical cells as part of the kind of just growth, development, and healing processes. So prokaryotic organisms, their reproductive processes are very, very simple. It's a process called binary fission. The prefix bi just means two. And so essentially what we have is one single prokaryotic cell that literally just sort of divides in half. It's a single chromosome of the DNA and some proteins. The DNA reproduces, So we get the two copies, and essentially the cell just sort of elongates. The two sort of chromosomes plus the protein sort of migrate along with the cell as it elongates, and then the cell splits in two, and you have two genetically identical daughter cells, and they're identical to each other and to the parent. So very, very, very simple binary fission process. Duplicate the chromosomes, they sort of separate, the cell elongates, and then essentially just splits in two. And that is how all of the prokaryotic organisms, so things like bacteria, archaea, this is how they reproduce. Now the process of sexual reproduction is decidedly more complicated, and we'll get into that in a little bit.